Okay, well, it is by my clock 9:17. So, if others want to come alongside, we'll let them jump in midstream. But welcome to David and Karen and Donna and Amanda. So, was thinking about what to do in Lent, and I'm a big fan of a fellow named Henry Nouwen, a Catholic priest, and he's written a number of books, including this one, "Behold the Beauty of the Lord: Praying with Icons." It's by Henry Nouwen. And what he does in this book is he reflects on his own experience with icons. And I thought that was be an interesting place to start, but not enough. So I'm gonna base some of what I say on what Nouwen has to offer. I've also spoken with a friend of mine who spent some time with icons, both praying with icons as well as writing icons. He's a priest and former monk, and so I did an interview with him, and we'll hear from Joseph as well. And then mostly this is just going to be a time for us to spend time with these icons. And to set the stage for that, what we're going to do is we're going to spend a lot of time sharing my screen. So let me go ahead and start that now. And always takes me a second to get sorted here on that. All right, so the course, of course, is Behold the Beauty of the Lord, Praying with Icons, based on material from Henry Nouwen, as well as Father Joseph Wallace Williams, from whom you'll hear. And the point here is, in the midst of the noise of the world around us, the busyness of our own lives, even when we're locked at home, as we've been this week with the snow, at least some of us, we're still bombarded by sights and sounds. And so this is an effort, especially in a time of Lent, to step away from that. So we'll talk about that this time. We'll also talk about how do we, what's our prayer language? Our prayer language and our theological language tends to be the language of words. That's very Western and very appropriate, and we're very word oriented in our thinking and our approach. Icons draw us away from that and invite us into a different way to be in conversation with God, a different way to understand God. But one of the first steps is just to take the things in our life and just to pull away from the things that might distract us, the words and sometimes even the images. So I thought we'd talk first of all about the power of image. Now, throughout this, I'll be chattering away because that's what I do. But I invite you at any time and for any reason to stay unmuted and to pitch in, offer comments and questions and clarifications, whatever you wish. So first of all, does anybody recognize this photograph?
Yes, I do.
Okay, Karen, can you tell
it's Dust Bowl, or back in the 30s. Let's see, can't recall the art. The name of the photographer, but he was very famous, and I think it's he. I know he was married to our New Mexico artist too. You don't have problems with names sometimes, but sometimes I do. But anyway, I'll think of it by the end of the hour.
Yeah, no problem. So we've just been joined by somebody else. So welcome the person joining us. Yeah, I don't remember the artist's name either, but this is one of those photographs that shows up on lists of sort of the most famous photographs of the 20th century, American photographs in particular. Yeah, it was taken during the Depression. And what I invite you to do is first of all, what catches your eye first about this photograph? What do you see first?
Oh, was I talking? No. Well, you see that woman.
Okay, you see that woman. What about that woman?
She's having a hard time.
Yeah, it seems like she's having. What else do we see?
Those children.
Yeah. Okay. Keep looking.
Yeah.
Look like they're in a tent.
Go ahead.
They look like they're in a tent.
in very tattered clothing, or looking like maybe inadequate clothing. So
Yeah, very good. What else do you see?
Yeah, she kind of has that, as they say, the 1,000-yard stare.
Hopelessness.
Yeah. Yeah, those are all good. Those are really good observations. And this photograph has an enduring power because there's such a poignant story to be told. If you're aware that this was taken during the height of the Great Depression, then that sort of places the photograph in context. So we understand it better, don't we? Because we understand that we've been taught at least a little better. None of us, I think, were old enough to have lived through the Great Depression, but we've certainly read about it and read books and seen movies and whatnot. And you're right. Somebody pointed out the tattered clothing. I mean, look at the woman's sleeve. Clearly, these are clothes that have seen better days. Look at the jacket and the kid on the left. It's a very formal looking jacket, isn't it? It's it's what? I mean, that jacket doesn't look like something we're today.
there's a baby there too.
That's right, and there's a baby. Look at that. Almost.
Oh, I didn't see the baby.
Almost hidden. Yeah, see, That's brilliant. The more you look, the more you see. I'll be honest, I hadn't seen the baby there. I'd been so focused on the woman and the two older kids. You're right.
They do look like they've had haircuts. The children do. I guess she cut it. Looks like a bow.
Yeah, but what I'm thinking is, if you go to the barber, even the children, they'll usually shave the back of the neck.
Yeah, she's cut it, obviously, or somebody
herself. Yeah, that was not a professional haircut. So we have all these clues that tell us, something about the story. Now I look at this and I go, it's wonderful how her shoulder is in such sharp focus, but distressing as a photographer that her eyes are not. So I can look at this and see some technical issues with this as a photograph. It's a shame that I guess it's a pole that's holding up the tent on the right side of the image. It's a shame that's in the image in a way that doesn't tell us what it is. It just blocks part of the view. So technically, this is not a perfect photograph in those senses. Does that matter? Does it matter that her eyes?
I think it enhances.
Okay.
It enhances it, I think. It's not. Yeah.
It certainly doesn't take away from the power of the photograph, does it?
No.
And that's rather the point. I mean, we don't want this image speaks to us even if it is imperfect. And we will find, as we're looking at icons, in particular, the 4 icons that Henry Nouwen talks about in his book, none of them are perfect. At least there are none of them in perfect condition. And yet that doesn't diminish their power to speak to us and to reveal to us something about God. So I wanted us to take some time with a photograph that is, in its own way, I guess you could say, iconic, just because it is so well known. It's been reproduced countless times since the Great Depression. I mean, it just encapsulates that experience in a very personal and profound and engaging way. And that's just a photograph, right? That was the right guy at the right place at the right time. Able to take a profoundly good photograph. Icons.
Yeah. Oh, excuse me. Yeah, I just found it. It's Dorothea Lange, so it's really a woman that took it, and it was called Migrant Mother back in 1936. So.
Very good.
I'm reading a book right now by Kristen Hanna that's about the Dust Bowl and the migrant workers, same period. I mean, I'm just thinking this is a woman in my book. It's not, but it just, if anybody is interested in being depressed, that's a good book you feel the dust on you. It's just so.
Well, Okay, well, let's move on from this image. And I want to point that out that we live in an era, in a time when we are bombarded by images. I mean, I've got thousands, tens of thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of programs I can watch on my TV, thanks to streaming services like Netflix and Amazon Prime and Disney Plus, and I'm on YouTube TV. And I mean, just there's an inundation. We are just bombarded with things to watch and things to catch our eye, things to draw our attention, things to distract. There's just a never-ending source of those. And if it's not images, it's people and voices that clamor for our attention. We live in a very, doesn't feel, I mean, wouldn't it be nice to be in a crowd like that? I usually wouldn't like that, but now I'm looking at this crowd and I'm going, I'd like to be there. Just to be able to be that close to that many people. I think that would feel nice for a few minutes. But even though we're isolated, because of the virus in some very real ways, we are still surrounded by a sea of voices. So we've got images and we've got voices that all compete for our attention. Being prayerful with icons requires a kind of intentionality, and we'll talk about that more in a moment. But it says, you know what? Let's pull away from the images, let's pull away from the voices, and let's find an image, and let's isolate it. This is, of course, one of our stained glass windows, one of my favorite stained glass windows here at St. Mary's. And we spend some time just with an image. Now, this is, of course, not an icon per se, but we include stained glass windows in our churches, and we have ever since, they became available and possible, because they help tell the story. By looking at this image, we understand something about who Jesus is. Who is Jesus in this stained glass window, for example?
The shepherd.
Yeah, I am the good shepherd, he says, right? And he's holding the lamb, and he's got the crook in his hand. He's gazing at the lamb. I mean, why would we include this image among our stained glass windows? Why is this a good image for us to see in church? Is there anything this image tells us about the nature of Christ?
He offers comfort.
Go ahead.
He offers comfort. It gives you a sense of peace and well-being.
Yeah, and I think I heard somebody say that he loves us. I mean, we are Christ's beloved. Again, this is an image. We could spend time looking at this image, and what do we make of the use of color, and what do we make of the crook, and what does that signify, and what's the design? Appears to be almost some kind of design on his. Oh no, that's just the cincture, the rope. Anyway, we could spend some time discussing all this and debating this. But the point, frankly, is in the midst of all the things that we see, all the TV programs and movies and videos and newspaper articles and the words that we have and all the world around us, all the things that our eyes are constantly taking in, Nouwen points out we are forever seeing. I mean, we close our eyes. And I woke up this morning and I can't recall it, but I remember just going, well, that was a weird dream. I mean, even in my sleep, I see things. And so we are forever seeing. But the real question we ought to ask ourselves is, what do we really choose to see? Are we seeing just the stuff before us, or are we really being intentional about that? And now, in also point, and I won't quote him at length very often, but he does say at one point in his book, a spiritual life in the midst of our energy-draining society requires us to take conscious steps to safeguard that inner space where we can keep our eyes fixed on the beauty of the Lord. To me, this is one of the central statements that Nouwen makes in his introduction about the power of icons. And there's 4 elements to this I really want to focus on for a moment. The first is that, let me admit somebody. There we go. The first is that looking at icons is a conscious step. And you'll hear more about this from Joseph in a few minutes. But looking at an icon isn't just something, we don't just hang an icon on the wall because it looks pretty. We engage with it. It's a conscious choice. And the whole point here is that in the midst of everything going on outside of us, that the use of icons can help us protect that inner space, that inner life, where we connect most deeply with God. And the whole idea, of course, is how do we help keep our eyes, how do we keep our attention fixed on God? And as Nouwen puts it, the beauty of the Lord. In fact, that's what he named his book, isn't it? Behold, the beauty of the Lord. And let's hold that sort of in the back of our minds. And what might Nouwen mean by that? I'm not asking for an answer now, but let's hold that as something we may want to circle back to in the saying of the day. What does Nouwen mean by the beauty of the Lord? So it's a conscious choice of looking. I'm reminded of something we read in the Psalms, turn my eyes from watching what is worthless. We read in Psalm 119. So again, there is that intentionality. Now I want to point, this is Gary at this point. This is not from Nouwen. So if it's trite, it's because it's for me, not from Nouwen. But I think there's at least two ways we can look at things. One is just a glance. I glanced at the paper today and I saw that, that's going to get above freezing. Isn't that lovely? We glance at things. That's quite often the way we look at things as we employ our visual sense. And a glance is usually good enough. A glance can be quite informative, right? It's going to give us information. It's going to let us know something. That's lovely. I glanced at it. It's lovely. Icons require more than a glance. They require what Nouwen calls a gaze. To gaze at something is not merely to turn your eyeballs on it for a minute or two, going, okay, I got the basic shape. I got that's nice. And next, imagine yourself at a museum. The idea of being at a fine art museum, for some people at least, the idea is not to see how many pieces of art can I see in the next 60 minutes. What's the point of that? I mean, when you stand before something truly special, how do you move away from that? I mean, you do, but not until your eyes and your brain and your heart are ready. You got to gaze at it. You got to spend some time with that. And to see the baby nestled in the mother's arms that you didn't see the first minute or two you looked at that image, right? So that's a gaze. A glance is informative. A gaze can be formative. I think this is a useful distinction. If I glance at something, I can get some superficial information about it, but a gaze draws me in deeper. And this brings me to something we'll come back to when we think about how do we look at icons in particular. Icons are not informative. They're not intended to be informative. And by that I simply mean we can't look at an icon and go, oh, I always wondered what color his eyes were. Well, that's not what icons are about. They're not to reveal to us the physical shape or form or size or proportions of any of the subjects of the icon. Some of the icons I've seen of the Virgin holding Jesus. Sometimes the baby Jesus is portrayed in a way that seems very unlifelike. And you go, wow, that the person who drew this didn't have a very good artistic sense, did he or she? That's not the point. The point isn't to inform us as to, well, what did Jesus really look like? Or what did Mary really look like? Or how did Joseph really dress? That's not the point. The point is not to inform us, but to form us at a deeper level. And again, that requires us to take the time to stop and gaze, just to simply be present. One metaphor it's used with icons is icons are a bit like a window. Here's a lovely window. You can buy this window frame on Amazon, believe it or not. Yours for the price. And now that I've pulled up this image on Amazon, every time I go to Amazon, it suggests I want to buy this window. I don't. I just wanted the picture. But icons exist as a kind of a window frame. It's a lovely frame. This particular has 4 panes, but we put up a window because we want to see what's on the other side of the window. And the more we gaze at the window of an icon, the more clearly we begin to see what is behind it. Now, in this case, what was behind the window was actually an icon. But now, move that to the next step. What's behind the icon? Right now, we're looking at an image of Christ. His hand raised in blessing, the marks of the stigmata on his hands. But the more we gaze at this image, the more we can understand about the true Christ, the real Jesus, the more we can be drawn into understanding who God is. We live, of course, in a world of instantaneous information, right? I mean, I think Ted Cruz was in the airport probably all of 30 seconds before a photo went viral of him, in the airport, headed off to Mexico while most of Texas was in a deep freeze. Not a good move, Ted. Not smart, because we live in that age of instantaneous information. He's a smart guy. He should have known better, But we live in that world where stuff gets shared immediately. We react immediately. So we expect to understand instantly. When I was in high school, I didn't use this very often. It turned out to be not very helpful. But I remember that I could purchase in high school, certainly in college, more in college, Cliff's Notes. And there was another, they had a competitor as well, where you could buy the Cliff's Note version of Moby Dick. And if you didn't want to bother reading all of Melville's, epic novel, but just read the Cliff's Note. You'll get the highlights. Just get the Reader's Digest version, right? The abridged version. They hardly leave out anything important. And that's the kind of world that we live in, is we want that quick access. Icons deny us that. They're not about a quick sense of anything. In fact, the more time you spend with the icon, again, more is revealed. Nouwen writes that icons are not easy to see. Notice he puts that in quotes. It's only gradually. It's only after a prayerful presence that the icons begin to speak to us. And that's hard to do. That requires a kind of discipline. Nouwen also writes, and as they speak more to our inner than to our outer senses. So we have to use our eyeballs, our sense of sight, because that's what's available to us. But again, we are trying to understand something that isn't limited to the two dimensions of an icon, but it's something much deeper. Nouwen writes, icons speak to the heart that searches for God. And I know that so many cultures describe this yearning, and so many religions really speak to the yearning that I think all people have to fill something in their lives. When I was a junior in high school, there was a hole in my life, an emptiness. I couldn't describe it. I only knew that it was there, and I also knew that it was not being filled by what I was getting from school, from my friends, even from my family. And so when I had an invitation to come to a youth group, I was leery, a little suspicious of this, a little uncertain about what that meant, what that would look like. Because after all, they were like religious, and I didn't think I was. But I went because I was looking to fill that emptiness in my life, what some would describe as a God-shaped hole. And I did find it. I mean, I found it among people who were my contemporaries. I found it with the youth leaders, the sponsors, this married couple. They were absolutely wonderful. And everybody at that first youth group meeting was absolutely more profane than I had ever heard anybody in my life. And especially the adult sponsors. They used the worst language I'd ever heard. And the woman sponsor, she was the bishop's daughter. And I'm thinking to myself, who are these people? And they think that they're religious, but they speak in such a foul way. Only much later, years, decades later, have I begun to understand. They spoke in that way because they were being absolutely honest with each other, absolutely vulnerable to each other. Later, when we gathered for a time of prayer, the profanity pretty much ended, but an expression of absolute profound faith was offered and shared. When somebody in that group prayed for me, there was no doubt that was just as authentic as their profanity had been earlier. And I really felt myself being connected and drawn into something bigger than me, and that could maybe provide the thing for which I'd been searching, as indeed it did. So the icons speak to that same need. And I think that even if we are connected to church and we think our spiritual needs are being met in most respects, we're still searching for God. We're still yearning to fill that hole. We're still yearning to connect. And we may do so in a variety of ways, through reading the Bible, through praying, through Bible studies, through the Eucharist, if and when that's available. But icons provide just another avenue that's worth thinking about. Now, earlier I mentioned my friend, Father Joseph Wallace Williams. I first met Joseph, about 12, 13 years ago. He was the associate rector at Grace St. Luke's in Memphis. He went on from there, spent some time as a monk. Yes, if you didn't know, we have monks in the Episcopal Church. And while he was there, and you'll hear him tell this, not this week, but in subsequent weeks, he was basically encouraged, if not required, to take on a spiritual discipline. And for him, that was icons. Icons were already part of his spiritual life, but he learned how to write icons, which is what you call the process of creating them. Anyway, so he is now, next month, he'll be the rector at the Church of St. Luke and the Epiphany in Philadelphia. And I looked online, it's a beautiful church. Oh my goodness. Warm, funny, generous, very loving man. And I'm just delighted that I've made his acquaintance. Anyway, Joseph and I recorded a little conversation on Zoom about a week and a half ago, and I'm going to share fragments of it from time to time. So our first fragment, I just asked him it's a real sort of basic, fundamental starting question, if you will. So here's Father Joseph. For the uninitiated, who've not spent the kind of time with icons that obviously you have, they become a curiosity. They become a thing of beauty. Mm-hmm. How is it we need to see them so that we see an icon not just as a nice addition to our decor, mm-hmm. but something essential to our spirit?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It starts off. When I was a monk, the old monks would always say, they come for all of the wrong reasons and they stay for all of the right ones. And we start off with liking the icon because it's pretty and it adds some ambiance to our home or to our church. But we end up having them stick around for all of the right reasons. And so if we can begin to see them as images of our heavenly family, we don't just put up a picture of grandma because it looks pretty in the room. We don't just put up a cross, or at least I don't. I don't put a cross I don't have a cross in my bedroom over my bed just because it's pretty. I have it there so that I'm reminded of how much I'm loved. I put a portrait of grandma because I'm reminded of those memories. I have on my mantle in my living room, I've got pictures of my sister's wedding. And I've got my godchildren. And I've got my biological mother who's gone to glory. They're all there. Yeah, it adds a nice little something to the living room. But when I look at it, I remember a moment. I remember love. Sometimes I remember pain. And remember, as my ancestors would say, how I got over. So it begins by, acknowledging their beauty. But then remembering that this is a part of our sacred story. These are our ancestors. These are our family members. This is a part of where heaven and earth meet.
All right. So could everybody hear that okay?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, I
Good.
could hear it.
Okay, good. All right. So what else? So at the end, I mean, because we're recording this on Zoom, so that's always a bit dodgy sometimes. But at the end, he said something that really struck me, that for him, icons are a place where heaven and earth meet. Is there anything else that Father Joseph said that may have caught your ear? Well, we'll be hearing more from him in the next 4 weeks, because each week we'll have a little segment from him. Most of them are a little bit longer than that one, where he'll talk. Next week, for example, he'll talk about an icon that he wrote and describe it as a bit of a family portrait, and so we'll see more of that. So the idea is, for the next 4 weeks, we're going to be engaging in 4 different icons. And what I've done is, if you go to the St. Mary's website, at the top, there's a little thing that says icons, a little navigation bar at the top. And you click on that, and about partway down the screen there, you'll see where I've got the 4 icons available. You can click on them and look at them on your computer. If you want, you can download those and print them out if you wish. And in fact, I would invite you to either spend time with them on your computer or print them out and look at them. If you would like me to print some out for you, because we've got the color copier here at the church, I'd be glad to do that for you if that would be helpful. And I would encourage you to spend a little time before next week's class with the next icon we'll be discussing, so that when we come into our next session, we will have all spent a little time with the icon, just again to spend time to see if we can we see the baby, or what else is going to be revealed. And because we're doing it this way, we're going to spend time with just one icon a Sunday, because I don't want to confuse things and try and talk about 4 very different icons in the space of 45 minutes. I think that would do none of them justice. We'll hear a little bit from Father Joseph. I'll share with you some of Henry Nouwen's own experiences and reflections. We'll have time for our own, but it may mean that although we're starting at 9:15, we may not run all the way till 10 o'clock each time. We may easily, but I'm not doing this to fill a prescribed amount of time, but to allow the time necessary. So we may run a little short some Sundays, which I think should be okay. That's if we've shared what we can, then when we're done, I suppose. It's unlike some classes where I've got so much material to cover, I want to pack it in. This is quite the opposite. I want us to have I don't want us to glance at a bunch of stuff. I want us to gaze at just one thing for Sunday. So next Sunday, we'll be contemplating an icon of the Holy Trinity. This is by a fellow named Rublev. And all these are very old. I mean, centuries old, and have seen centuries of adoration and use, and particularly in Eastern churches. And now one considers this particular icon to be an invitation to dwell in the house of love. Then we'll move to the Virgin of Vladimir, in which now one finds assurance that we truly belong to God. And then then next we'll move to the Savior of Zvenigorod, unveiling the face of the Lord. And this one is a good example to me of, this is clearly an imperfect icon because it's been damaged over time, and yet there's still a real resonance and power to this image. And then the final icon is the descent of the Holy Spirit, in which Nouwen perceives a commission to liberate the world. And so we'll find out what he means by that. So that's sort of the roadmap, if you will, for the next few weeks. We'll spend a little time on each of those icons over the 45 minutes or so, and that's where we are. Any questions or observations or comments?
I wish you'd print them off for me, please. And I'll come down for Daddy this week if I get out.
Okay, let me grab a pen and make a note. Icons for Dudley. Big
I bet others would like.
Also for Carol.
Okay. Anybody else? Okay, well, I'll print off like 3 or 4 sets of these, and if you want them, we'll have them available, and you can just pick them up, or if you're a little housebound, maybe we can figure out how we get them to you, Carol. I mean, I meant Donna. But good. Anything else? All right.
Would you consider, let me ask you a question.
Sure.
You know, you get those Madonnas in Mexico, and they're Madonna of this and Madonna of that. Would those be considered icons also?
Well, I think that if you spoke with somebody who was very, very intentional in their study of icons, classical iconography, I would say they would look at that and say that maybe that doesn't fit. Some of those images, for example, you might never find in that specific way in, say, an Orthodox church, because icons are created or written using very specific materials. You'll hear Joseph, for example, getting eggs, because they're painted with the egg tempera for part of it. Some they're created using gold leaf. But I have one, I think, I used to know where it was in my room. Well, hang on.
Somebody must have hung it up in the wrong place.
This is an image of Saint Anthony. Okay. San Antonio, as he's called, who's feast day of June 13th, finder of lost articles, right? Patron of animals, especially burros and cattle, patron of the home.
That's Mexican. Yeah.
Saint Anthony is this came with the little card, so I'm not being very clever in knowing this off the top of my head. But this was created by somebody in Alamogordo, New Mexico. It was given to me as a gift, right? And what else does it say? Saint Anthony was born in Lisbon to a rich family. He gave up his riches to become a Franciscan. He came to Italy and became a great preacher and miracle worker. So this is not an icon in the traditional sense. There's no gold leaf. It's not an image you would necessarily find in an Orthodox church. And yet, to my eye, maybe I'm not being as particular as I ought to be, but this is an icon in its own way.
Yeah.
This is and correct me if I'm wrong. I always get this backwards. Is this a retablo or a bulto? I always get those confused.
Retablo just because it's flat.
Okay, that's what I was thinking. And the bulto could be something similar. I've got a bulto at home of St. Francis, which is more like a statue. But I love this. I love this image, and I love this image of St. Anthony, right? But I don't think that's a traditional icon. But why? But just because it doesn't follow those ancient forms. So.
And are they usually mostly Middle Eastern and Russian?
As far as I know, yeah. I mean, the use of icons, obviously most Western churches don't use icons as often. They're viewed with a certain sense of suspicion, because the concerned people say, well, now why would you be worshiping a piece of wood? Why would you be worshiping a painting? It's like that's not the devotional practice that's being observed here at all. But we do think about, if normally in Lent, on Fridays in Lent, we would offer the Stations of the Cross, right? A handful of us, and I know David and Donna have joined me here for this. We'll gather and we walk the 14 stations, go to those 14, in our case, just little white tiles that are placed around the perimeter on the inside of the church, and depicting the 14 stations or 14 events of Good Friday that we remember. Each of those is in its own way iconic. So I think icons there's a very formal description of how they were written and their materials used and all of that. And you'll hear Father Joseph talk about at one point that when he's writing an icon, he's not creating something that he says, oh, I think this would look good. He is following some very well established patterns, very well established images and approaches. So I guess what I'm trying to say is there's the more formal understanding of what an icon is, and something that I think serves very much the same purpose, even if the form is somewhat different. I love my St. Anthony.
And interesting, in our computer world, we go back to icons on our screen. Is what we call them.
Exactly.
And
Exactly.
an icon is an image.
Yep.
And-
And it represents a function, or what, at least on the computer, what it can do. But
Well, and the name Veronica means true image. Usually it's the station where the Jesus has his face not wiped by a woman in the crowd. And then
And
transfers.
Yeah, and she's known as Veronica. Yeah, true image. Yeah, it's cool. I like that. Well, good. Well, good. And and by the way, if in the course of this, if you have an icon at home or an image that you think that you have found particularly, useful to you, I think it might be kind of cool along the way if you want to send me just a picture of that you take on your phone even. We can share that and have conversations about those as well, because I want us to engage in the 4 icons, the great icons that Nowen discusses. But if you've got something in your own world that has been useful to you, and you're willing to share that with us, that would be cool as well. That'd be wonderful. All right, well, we're just about to hit 10 o'clock, and I've got to go set up my recording studio since I wasn't here for Ash Wednesday. I've got to go reestablish my recording studio in the nave of the church. I took things down to do that from home, so better get over and get that taken care of. But any final questions, comments, observations? Well, thank you all for being with us, and we'll see you hopefully just in about 30 minutes.
okay, thank you.
Take care.
Thank you.
See you.